David Carter was a devoted husband, beloved by his small town, until the day his wife, Elena, uncovered a secret so dark it would shatter everything they knew. Hidden away in their own home was a chilling connection to a missing woman, a mystery buried for decades. What was David hiding beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, and how far would he go to keep the truth locked away? Ashfield was the kind of town that rarely made the news. Tucked between green hills and long-forgotten railroad tracks, it moved at a slower pace. People still left their doors unlocked, and everyone knew their neighbor's dog by name. Among its 4,000 residents, one couple stood out, not for anything flashy or scandalous, but for the calm, almost storybook life they seemed to live. David Carter and his wife Elena were the picture of devotion, quiet elegance and small-town stability. David was a gentle man, tall and lean with silver streaks in his hair that made him look wiser than his age. He played the organ every Sunday morning at Ashfield Community Church, his fingers moving like clockwork across the keys. Congregants swore they could feel something spiritual in the way he played, soft sweeping melodies that filled the room with warmth. Elena was always beside him, neatly dressed, her expression peaceful, her eyes rarely straying from David during the service. She worked at the town library, always on time, always polite, always helpful. No one ever heard them argue. They walked together every evening after dinner, rain or shine, hand in hand as if time hadn't touched them. People admired them. Some even envied them. To most, David and Elena were the last real example of old-fashioned love and trust. They hosted small garden parties in spring, brought casseroles to the sick, and never missed a church event. Young couples would look at them and wonder what their secret was. But if you stood close enough, if you really paid attention, there were cracks. They were too quiet, too polished. Elena smiled a little too late at jokes. David's eyes lingered too long on the stained glass windows during sermons, as if looking for something he'd lost long ago. Still, no one asked questions. Why would they? The Carters were perfect. That illusion began to shift subtly when David started taking longer walks alone. He told Elena he needed time to think, something about the weight of his responsibilities, he said. But he never used to need time alone. Elena noticed he was distant at dinner, often chewing slowly while staring past her, as though listening to something only could hear. Then there was the locked attic. They had lived in the same house for nearly 2 decades. Until recently, the attic door had never been locked. One evening, Elena had tried to put away winter blankets and found the door secured with a brand new padlock. She didn't ask about it right away. She told herself it was probably just old boxes or important papers, but the padlock felt out of place, almost theatrical, like a warning disguised as security. Around the same time, odd rumors began circulating, soft as whispers on a cold wind. A few churchgoers said they saw David visiting the church late at night, not practicing music, just sitting there, alone in the dark, staring at the altar. One janitor even claimed he found him kneeling with tears on his face, muttering something under his breath. When asked about it later, David denied it and laughed it off. "Just a little insomnia," he said. "Nothing to worry about." But Elena began to worry. She noticed the church bulletins he kept in a drawer, all marked with red ink in the margins. The drawer was always locked after that. She noticed how his hands shook just slightly when they prayed together, and sometimes when she touched his arm, he pulled away too quickly, like the warmth of her hand burned. The unease grew slowly, like a fog settling over the town. No one said anything out loud, not yet. But the sense that something was off with David and Elena was no longer just imagination. It was something real, something waiting just beneath the surface, pressing its fingers against the glass, waiting for someone to look closer. And someone would. Someone was already watching. She arrived without warning, slipping into Ashfield like a shadow that no one invited. Her name was Marla Green, and no one knew exactly why she was there. She didn't introduce herself at any public event or ask to meet the mayor, like most newcomers did. She just appeared one morning at the corner diner, ordered black coffee and oatmeal, and read the newspaper from front to back, eyes scanning with the calm of someone used to hunting for small truths in plain sight. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was impossible to ignore. People in Ashfield weren't used to outsiders staying long. Tourists came through in the fall to see the turned leaves, or in the summer to hike the quiet trails. But Marla wasn't a tourist. Her clothes were too plain, her gaze too sharp. She didn't ask about local shops or the town's history. She watched people, measured them, took mental notes like someone waiting for something or some. After a week, she began attending services at Ashfield Community Church. Always alone. Always in the back row. She arrived just before the first hymn and left the moment the sermon ended. At first, people assumed she was just a quiet woman, trying to start fresh. But over time, a few noticed her attention lingered on the front pew on David and Elena Carter. She never smiled at them, never introduced herself, but she watched, and watched. David noticed. It was hard not to. Marla's eyes were the kind that didn't just glance, they studied. After the third Sunday in a row, he found himself uneasy, fumbling a chord during the offertory hymn. That had never happened before. Elena, seated beside him, squeezed his hand in comfort, but he didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the back pew where Marla sat motionless, her face unreadable. Father Raymond, the aging priest of the church, also noticed Marla's interest. She approached him after service one Sunday, asking about the church's history, its records, and past attendees. Her tone was casual, but her questions were oddly specific, focused on events from over a decade ago. She asked if there had ever been any major incidents tied to the church, if anyone had suddenly stopped attending, if anyone had disappeared. He gave her polite answers, surface-level truths, but something about her unsettled him. She wasn't just a curious visitor, she was digging. Later that week, she returned to the church office and requested access to archived attendance logs and church guest books. She had an official-looking badge, Detective Marla Green, Cold Case Division. That changed everything. Father Raymond handed over the records reluctantly, his hands trembling just slightly. The files she asked for were old and dusty, buried beneath layers of forgotten history. She spent hours with them, flipping page after page, eyes darting from name to name. Finally, one entry stopped her cold. August 14th. 11 years ago, a guest signed the book, Isabel Frost. Below her name was another signature, D. Carter. Marla stared at it for a long time, lips pressed into a thin line. She took a photo of the page with her phone, slipped the book back into the drawer and left without saying a word. Back at her rented cottage, she pinned a photo of David Carter onto a corkboard already covered in documents, maps and scribbled notes. A line connected him to Isabel Frost, a missing persons case that had haunted Marla's files for years. Isabel had vanished on that exact date, last seen near a church in a town no one remembered. Until now. Marla didn't believe in coincidences. She believed in patterns, in details, in people hiding things for far too long. And she had a feeling the quiet, respectable organist with the loving wife and flawless reputation wasn't just a kind man of faith. He was hiding something dark. And now that she had found him, she wasn't going to stop until she knew exactly what it was. In the dim light of her rented cottage, Marla spread the evidence across the table like pieces of a puzzle she had studied too long. The photo of the guest book signature stared back at her. D. Carter scribbled in black ink beneath Isabel Frost. Her gut twisted every time she looked at it. The handwriting was sharp and careful, not rushed or accidental. It had been a confident signature, placed there without fear of being remembered. But memory had a way of fading in small towns. People forgot. Records gathered dust. Secrets buried themselves. Isabel Frost's case had haunted Marla for years. She wasn't just another missing girl. There had been something different, something about the way she vanished. No body, no note, no known enemies. A bright 23-year-old with a quiet life and no reason to run. One day she was there, the next she wasn't. No trace, No sign, just a single phone ping placing her near a rural church the day she disappeared. The trail had gone cold, until now. Marla had been going through old regional guest books, town by town, church by church. She didn't expect to find anything useful, but Ashfield's records had stopped her cold. Now that she had a name and a location, the edges of the mystery were beginning to sharpen. She wasn't just investigating a case anymore. She was stepping into something bigger, something buried beneath layers of trust and ritual. The kind of darkness people refuse to believe exists. She returned to the church office the next morning, under the pretense of more historical research. Father Raymond, visibly uneasy now, watched her closely, but didn't interfere. She combed through newsletters, bulletins, and rosters. Anything dated around the week Isabel vanished. She noticed a pattern. David Carter's name appeared more than usual. Volunteer for church maintenance. Solo evening prayer sessions. Musical preparation, late into the night. He had been present almost every day that week, alone. Another file caught her attention, an old church newsletter with a short article about a youth counseling program. In it, Isabel Frost was mentioned briefly as a volunteer. Her connection to the church hadn't been casual. She'd been involved, active, trusted. It wasn't just a visit. She had belonged here for a time, which meant whoever took her likely knew the church well. That narrowed things. Marla reviewed the architecture of the church itself, asking to explore the space under the guise of inspecting water damage in the foundation. She wasn't looking for leaks. She was looking for forgotten corners, places someone could hide something or someone. The basement was musty and lined with cabinets of old communion supplies and rotting hymnals. In the back, behind a pile of folding chairs, she found an odd spot. A square of wall that didn't match the rest. A slightly different shade, a faint scent of mildew that suggested it had been recently disturbed. She ran her fingers along the edges and felt the faint outline of a doorway that had been sealed shut. Her breath caught. She took photos and quietly left, making a note to bring ground-penetrating equipment later. That night, she logged everything. Dates, names, locations, behavioral changes. A timeline began to form, one that pointed more clearly to David Carter with each entry. His community image was flawless, but the movements beneath the surface told a different story. What disturbed Marla most, though, wasn't David's apparent proximity to Isabel's disappearance. It was the absence of any suspicion from the town. No reports, no rumors, no questions. The town hadn't just forgotten Isabel. It had erased her, and somehow David had slipped through the cracks untouched. But not anymore. Marla was close now. She could feel it. Something had happened inside that church, and whatever it was, David Carter had been the last to see it. Elena Carter had always believed her marriage was built on something solid, routine, respect, and a quiet love that grew over time. David had been her anchor for nearly 2 decades, calm in a way that made her feel safe. They shared everything: Sunday coffee, weekly grocery trips, soft conversations after dinner. But over the past few months, something had shifted. It was subtle at first: missed glances, awkward silences, questions that never received real answers. Then it became impossible to ignore. David no longer lingered after breakfast. He spoke less. He spent long hours in the attic, which had always been just a storage space for old furniture and forgotten boxes. At first, Elena assumed it was just stress. Maybe something at church had overwhelmed him. But then she noticed the lock. It was a new padlock, clean and cold, and completely out of place in their well-worn house. It had never been there before. She stood before it one afternoon with a folded basket of laundry in her hands, her mind buzzing. She told herself not to overthink it, but the next morning David left early for the church without a word. That was when curiosity took control. She searched the house, her movements quick but quiet. In the back of his sock drawer, beneath a pair of neatly folded shirts, she found a small silver key on a thin chain. She hesitated only a moment before taking it and heading to the attic. The lock clicked open. The air inside was stale, heavy with dust and forgotten years. Light filtered through a narrow window, revealing stacks of boxes and old fabric-covered trunks. Everything looked ordinary until she noticed one box shoved against the far wall separate from the rest. It was small, wooden, and shut tightly with a leather strap. Inside she found papers, newspaper clippings, mostly. Headlines she didn't recognize. Local girl still missing. Family begs for answers after 23-year-old vanishes. No leads in Isabel Frost case. The name caught her eye immediately. Isabel Frost. It meant nothing to her, but David had kept it. All of it. She pulled out the next item, a delicate silver necklace with a name engraved on the back. Isabel. The metal was tarnished, but the lettering was clear. Elena froze, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would shake the box out of her hands. She held the necklace as if it might burn her, trying to understand what it was doing in her attic. In her husband's secret box. Her mind raced. She had never heard of this woman. David had never mentioned her. The clippings spanned over a decade, carefully trimmed and organized by date. It wasn't casual interest, it was obsession. She put the box back, exactly as she had found it, and relocked the attic. Her hands were wetter by the time David returned that evening. He kissed her on the cheek and made small talk, his tone gentle, unchanged, as though nothing had happened, as though he hadn't hidden someone else's story in the dark above their heads. Elena barely slept that night. Her thoughts spiraled. Who was Isabel? Why had David kept her things? What did it mean? She told herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he had known her. Maybe he had tried to help. But the pieces didn't fit, and deep in her chest, she felt a flicker of something cold: fear, doubt, betrayal. The man she thought she knew suddenly felt distant, like a painting she had stared at for years, only now realizing the eyes didn't match the smile. She didn't confront him, not yet. She needed to understand more. But something inside her shifted that day. The trust was cracked. And from that moment forward, every word David spoke, every glance, every touch, felt like a performance. She no longer knew if the man she loved was her husband or a stranger wearing his face. Elena's mind was a storm of unanswered questions and growing unease. The discovery in the attic had shattered the quiet rhythm of her life, replacing it with shadows she couldn't shake. She needed help, but who could she trust? The town was small, and rumors traveled fast, yet there was one person she believed might hold the key. A man bound by sacred trust and years of knowing her husband, Father Raymond. The old priest had served Ashfield Community Church longer than anyone could remember. His gentle voice and kind eyes made people confide in him, seeking comfort or guidance. Elena hesitated for days, wrestling with the weight of what she knew, the fear of revealing too much, and the loyalty that still tugged at her heart. But finally, she found herself walking through the church doors in the evening, the soft glow of candlelight flickering through stained glass. She requested a private meeting with Father Raymond, a rare and solemn request that he did not refuse. The small room smelled of aged wood and incense, heavy with the silence between them. Elena laid the newspaper clippings and the necklace on the worn table. The priest's eyes darkened when he recognized the name, Isabel Frost. Elena spoke carefully, choosing her words like a tightrope walker, balancing above an abyss. She told Father Raymond what she had found, what she suspected, and how her faith in David was crumbling beneath the weight of doubt. The priest listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When she finished, Father Raymond leaned back in his chair, hands clasped tightly together. His voice was low, almost a whisper. He spoke of a time long ago when Isabel had come to him in secret. She had been troubled, frightened of something she never fully explained. The priest admitted he had counseled her, tried to protect her, but that she had disappeared soon after. He confessed that he had withheld some information out of fear of scandal, fear of tearing apart the community, fear of confronting what might be hiding within the walls of the church itself. Elena's heart pounded as the priest revealed that David had been involved, though he wouldn't say how. Father Raymond's eyes dropped to the floor. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. The priest promised to keep Elena's confidence, bound by the sacred seal of confession, yet the knowledge weighed heavily on him. What Elena did not know was that Father Raymond's silence had cost Isabel dearly. His reluctance to speak had allowed a darkness to fester unchecked. The priest had been burdened with guilt for years, watching the community move on while the truth stayed buried. His own faith had been shaken. Outside the church, Elena's world was unraveling. Every familiar place now felt tainted. The quiet streets seemed colder, the friendly faces less sincere. She looked at David differently, no longer just as her husband, but as a man wrapped in secrets so deep they threatened to swallow them both. Yet, even as the priest offered his sympathy, Elena sensed a barrier between them. There were questions he wouldn't answer, stories he wouldn't tell. His eyes would flicker away whenever she pressed too hard. It was as if he was protecting someone or something more than the truth. And the truth, Elena realized, was far more dangerous than she ever imagined. The church, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Elena left that night with more questions than answers, her steps slow and heavy. The priest's confession had opened a door, but it also revealed how little light shone beyond it. Something had been hidden, protected by faith and fear, and now the walls were beginning to close in. She had to find out what David was hiding, but with every secret uncovered, she feared the cost of knowing might be more than she was willing to pay. David's world was unraveling faster than he could control. The man who had once been the steady heart of Ashfield now moved like a shadow, quiet, tense, and always watching. His fingers trembled each time he played the organ at church, though the congregation never noticed. No one knew about the restless nights spent staring at the ceiling, haunted by memories he had tried to bury, memories that refused to stay silent. He hadn't meant for any of it to happen. When Isabel Frost first walked into the church all those years ago, she was bright and vulnerable, searching for guidance. David had offered her kindness, a safe place amidst the turmoil in her life, but kindness had a way of twisting when hidden beneath layers of fear and guilt. He remembered the nights they spent talking, the whispered confessions in the quiet corners of the church basement. Isabel had trusted him, and he had felt responsible. But when she began to ask questions about people she shouldn't have, questions about the church's darker history, about secrets no one dared speak aloud, David had grown scared. The fear had pushed him to silence, to avoid her calls, to lock away the truth in the attic with the box of clippings and memories. And then, one night, everything spiraled out of control. He had gone to the church late, after everyone had left, hoping to find Isabel and calm the storm she was stirring. But the meeting didn't go as planned. The confrontation turned heated. Words were exchanged, sharp and desperate, and in a moment of panic, something inside him snapped. He couldn't explain it fully, even to himself. The violence was sudden and terrible. When it was over, Isabel was gone. David had hidden the truth behind locked doors and silent prayers. He buried the guilt beneath the melodies he played on the organ, beneath the smiles he showed the world. But the past never stayed quiet. Now, with Marla Green's investigation stirring the surface, the past was clawing its way back. The silver necklace in Elena's hands, the newspaper clippings in the attic. Every secret was unraveling like threads in a fraying tapestry. David tried to maintain control, but the walls were closing in. At church, Marla's probing questions and Elena's growing suspicion left him isolated. The late-night visits to the empty pews, once his refuge, now felt like a trap. Every shadow seemed to watch, every whisper seemed to accuse. He found himself drawn back to the sealed section of the basement, the hidden door beneath the false wall. There he had concealed more than memories, he had hidden evidence. A small locked box contained items that could destroy the fragile peace Ashfield clung to: photos, personal belongings, and a journal filled with Isabel's handwriting. Each page was a confession, a cry for help that had never reached the light. David's hands shook as he touched the box. He knew that opening it could mean the end, not just for him, but for the community that trusted him. But keeping it locked was no longer an option. The truth was breaking free whether he wanted it or not. Meanwhile, Elena's silence cut deeper than any accusation. Her eyes, once full of love, now held doubt and fear. The distance between them grew with each passing day, thickening the air in their home until it felt suffocating. He longed to explain, to confess, but every word felt like a betrayal. The town of Ashfield sensed the change too. Quiet conversations in grocery aisles, lingering looks at the church, and the hushed rumors about the Carter marriage fraying at the edges. No one wanted to believe the man they admired could be involved in something so dark, but the cracks were too wide now to ignore. David knew his time was running out. One night, as rain pounded the roof and thunder rattled the windows, he sat alone in the church sanctuary. The organ's keys gleamed under the flickering candlelight. His fingers hovered above them, hesitant, trembling with the weight of everything he had hidden. The music began softly, a mournful melody that echoed through the empty hall. Each note carried his regret, his fear, his desperate hope for redemption. But deep down, David understood one terrible truth. Some sins cannot be erased with music. Some secrets demand to be uncovered, no matter the cost. The day Marla decided to confront the Carter household was thick with tension. She had spent weeks piecing together fragments of a story that refused to stay hidden, and now the final threads led directly to the quiet street where David and Elena lived. The modest house looked ordinary from the outside, its white paint slightly faded, the garden neat but unremarkable. Nothing about it suggested the storm brewing within. Marla stood at the doorstep, her breath steady despite the pounding in her chest. She had learned to separate emotion from investigation, but this was different. The closer she got, the more personal the case felt. Isabel Frost's face haunted her, young, frightened, vanished without a trace. And now, all signs pointed here to this house filled with secrets. Elena answered the door, surprise flickering across her face before she masked it with polite restraint. Marla introduced herself as a detective working on cold cases, careful not to reveal too much too soon. She requested to speak with Elena privately, away from David. Elena hesitated, but agreed, her eyes wary yet desperate. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with unspoken fears. Elena led Marla to the small living room, where sunlight struggled through drawn curtains. The silence stretched between them before Elena spoke, her voice low and trembling. She confessed everything: the discovery in the attic, the box of clippings and the necklace, the growing distance with David. Marla listened carefully, her mind racing to connect every detail. Then came the moment Elena feared most, the confrontation with David. David was in the kitchen when Marla asked to speak with him alone. He looked up, startled, eyes sharp but guarded. There was a flicker of recognition in his gaze, a silent acknowledgement that the past had caught up. Marla laid out the evidence with deliberate calm: the guest book signatures, the missing girl's name, the box hidden in the attic, the sealed basement door. David's face tightened, but he said nothing. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the weight of years pressed down. Suddenly Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm inside. She demanded the truth. Who was Isabel Frost? What had happened all those years ago? Why had David kept her secrets hidden in their home? David's silence was unbearable. His hands clenched into fists as he fought the urge to break down or run. Finally, the truth spilled out, not in words, but in a confession written long ago, found tucked away in the hidden box. He revealed that Isabel had been more than a troubled volunteer. She had been someone he cared for deeply, someone whose pain had mirrored his own, but their connection had spiraled into a darkness neither could escape. The night she vanished, a struggle had erupted, one neither wanted to remember. In a desperate moment, David had made a choice that changed everything. The church, the town, the life he built with Elena, all were built on lies and silence. As David spoke, Marla's eyes scanned the room, alert for any sign that the truth might still be buried deeper. That's when she noticed the faint outline of the sealed door in the basement, a heavy silence behind it. Without hesitation, she moved to the basement and pushed open the hidden door. The air was cold and stale. Inside was a narrow space, barely big enough to stand. On the floor lay remnants of what could only be described as a hurried burial, a patch of earth disturbed beneath the floorboards. The scent of damp soil and decay lingered. Elena's gasp shattered the quiet. Marla felt her pulse quicken. The evidence was there, too clear to deny. The small town of Ashfield, with its serene streets and friendly smiles, had been hiding a dark secret all along. And now, it was finally coming to light. The news spread through Ashfield like wildfire, shattering the calm, tearing apart the illusion of safety the town had clung to for decades. The quiet streets buzzed with whispers, the familiar faces now shadowed with suspicion. The church that had once been a sanctuary was now a scene of tragedy and betrayal, its walls echoing with secrets long buried. Marla stood outside the church, the weight of the case pressing down on her. The discovery in the basement had changed everything. The patch of disturbed earth beneath the floorboards wasn't just evidence, it was a verdict on years of silence and denial. Isabel Frost's disappearance was no longer a cold case. It was a chilling confession, etched in soil and shadows. Elena Carter's world had shattered, her life ripped apart by the man she had trusted most. The husband she had loved, the devoted figure in the community, was now a suspect in a crime that had haunted the town for more than 20 years. The necklace she had found in the attic, once a simple piece of jewelry, had become a symbol of betrayal. David was taken into custody quietly, his once composed demeanor fractured beneath the weight of guilt. The town watched in stunned silence as the man they had admired was led away in handcuffs. Some whispered of shock, others of relief, but all knew that the peaceful facade of Ashfield had been irreparably broken. Yet, even as the investigation unfolded, there were whispers of something deeper, something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. Father Raymond, the priest who had held the town's confidences for years, was quietly questioned. His reluctance to speak, his hesitation to reveal the full truth, suggested that Isabel's story was only part of a darker tale. The church's role in the mystery raised uncomfortable questions. How many secrets had it sheltered? How many cries for help had been silenced behind its stained glass windows? The congregation struggled to reconcile their faith with the betrayal they now faced. Marla's determination never wavered. She delved into old records, piecing together fragments of conversations, hushed rumors, and forgotten reports. Isabel's journal, recovered from the hidden box, revealed fears that stretched beyond one man, fears of a network of silence, of a community bound by unspoken rules and fear. As the trial approached, the tension in Ashfield reached a breaking point. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, journalists, and families desperate for answers. The prosecution laid bare the chilling details, the struggle, the concealment, the years of lies, but even as evidence mounted, David's defense painted a picture of a man trapped by fear, a man haunted by his own demons. Elena watched from the front row, her eyes shadowed by pain and resolve. She had been torn apart by the truth, but found strength in seeking justice. The woman who had once lived in denial now stood as a symbol of courage, a beacon for those silenced by fear. In the final moments of the trial, a surprise witness stepped forward, a former church member who had left Ashfield years before. Their testimony added a new layer of complexity, revealing a pattern of cover-ups and threats that stretched beyond Isabel's case. The town's history was darker than anyone had dared imagine. When the verdict was finally delivered, the courtroom held its breath. Guilty. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap, releasing a wave of emotions: grief, relief, anger, and sorrow. Justice had been served, but the scars would remain. In the aftermath, Ashfield began a slow process of healing. The church reopened under new leadership, committed to transparency and renewal. Elena, now free from the shadows of doubt, found a fragile peace in rebuilding her life. Marla packed her notes and prepared to leave, her heart heavy but hopeful. The truth had been uncovered, the silence broken. But she knew the scars of betrayal ran deep, and the road to forgiveness would be long. As she walked away from the town, she glanced back once more at the steeple silhouetted against the fading sun, a symbol of faith and fallibility, of light and darkness intertwined. The story of Isabel Frost was finally told. But in the quiet spaces of Ashfield, some secrets still whispered, waiting for their own reckoning.